Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Our Future 101. And today we've got a very interesting topic to discuss, and that is what is the duty of Canadian citizens to be good citizens? What does it mean to be a good citizen in our country? What do you think?
I think that a lot of people associate being a good citizen with compliance, as we've seen in this pandemic. If you do as you're told, if you wear your mask and you wash your hands and sanitize your hands and get vaccinated, you're automatically a good citizen. But I think being an actual good citizen goes beyond that. And I mean, us as Canadians, we're often looked at, and the stereotype is that we're the good guys, or we're nice, or whatever it is. And I don't actually think that that's a compliment. I think that we're so obedient and compliant with a lot of things that happen, and we're not really aware of the things that happen, that people think that they think that we're the nice guys, which I don't actually think is a good thing. I don't think it's good that that's our
Hmm.
stereotype. I think being a good citizen goes beyond just doing as you're told, but it also is questioning what you're told,
Yeah.
right? Because then if you don't, that's when things go downhill. So it's questioning, um, it's actually participating in the things that are going on around you, participating in politics, which I don't think we do as much as we should, which is why we're in the current situation that we are. But I think it goes beyond just listening and doing as you're told.
Yeah, I agree with that. So let's talk about the participation aspect
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like, especially among students, our generation, they don't participate much in politics. I mean, like, I've got friends who are sometimes not even aware there was an election. They're like, "Oh my God, there's like lines in the polls, and I don't know what's going on." And I'm like, "Yeah, there's like an election going on."
I think I think there are some people that are our age that are invested in politics, but they're more invested in social justice than they really are in actual politics. And then there's a lot of people who just don't pay attention to either.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that that's an issue. I think that that's a problem.
Well, first, let's define what's a good citizen. What actually qualifies as a good citizen? Because you mentioned there's a huge issue that Canadians are known for being compliant. They're
Mm-hmm.
known for being nice.
Mm-hmm.
And as the story goes, nice guys finish last, right? In every race, in every sport, in every business, the nice guy is always going to be last and not going to be at the top. It's always the disagreeable people that make it on top of their field. They're not particularly very nice people. Because they disagree with things, they stand up for themselves, and then people treat them with fairness and with respect. But a person who is always obedient, always compliant, will be will be stomped on. They will be walked all over by the government or by another individual,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's suffering and there's loss.
I don't think that necessarily being a good citizen, I don't think you have to be a bad person, like, and be mean. Like, you can still be a kind person, you can still be a nice person. I think that's so important as well. But I think it's not just you're not just going to get through life being nice and avoiding conflict and avoiding problems and just hoping that things disappear. And I know a lot of people that are like, "Oh, I don't get involved in politics. It'll solve itself." And it's
Yeah.
no, no, it won't, because then that's how we end up in situations that we're in. Um, I think that being a good citizen, obviously there are rules you have to follow in a civilized society. That's obvious.
Hmm.
But I mean, I think I just think standing up for what's right. There's a lot that's been going on that people know is wrong, but they go along with it anyways. I don't think that's being a good citizen at all. Your fellow Canadians are losing their jobs. Your fellow Canadians are losing their education, and they just stand by and let it happen. They're
Hmm.
bystanders, or they encourage it and perpetuate it. And that's not being a good citizen. I think being a good citizen is standing up for those people, and it's even going against the narrative if you think it's wrong. I think that's what makes a good citizen a good person.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, there has to be a distinction between a bad person and somebody who is disagreeable, because that's a big distinction, right? People who are disagreeable in general, or would stand up for themselves, are not necessarily bad people,
No.
right? They're not necessarily mean. They might come off mean because they're standing up for themselves, and some people might not like that. But at the end of the day, they're standing up, they're defending themselves, and they're defending their company or their values or their principles, right? But if we're all going to just give up our principles because we don't want to upset anybody, that's when we get in trouble, because then you don't hold true to your convictions. And that's what we've seen with the pandemic is the government challenged us. The government challenged our convictions, our beliefs, and in freedom and liberty and personal responsibility. And people just gave that away because they're like, oh, I don't feel like defending that. I don't want to cause conflict. I'm just gonna abide by the authority and, comply with the institutions, comply with the universities, because, oh my God, they're authority, right? Well, but that's a problem, because they are giving up their rights and not being good citizens, standing up for those. Because if you don't retain those rights, and if you don't stand up for yourself, you're going to be like, people are going to walk all over you. They're going to take away everything that you have.
You briefly mentioned this, but having strong principles, I think, is also very important. Like you've mentioned, we've lost that over the course of this pandemic, and I think we've been losing it even before this pandemic.
Yeah.
But if you don't have any convictions, if you don't, or strong convictions that you're willing to stand up for, regardless of what they are, if you don't have strong principles that you choose to follow in your life, even when people make it difficult for you to do that, that's not a good citizen.
Yeah. And so I think this is a perfect moment to bring up a quote from one of the founding fathers of America. We're not in America.
No.
We're in Canada, but we're close neighbors, and our philosophies in terms of the countries are very similar in the way, it's a Western society. We are supposed to stand for freedom. We're supposed to stand for opportunity, the land of opportunity. And I think that goes along with Canada as well. And so I think it's relevant for Canadians to hear what the founding fathers were telling people when they were creating the land of the free, because they were dealing with people, with evil people back in the day. They always existed. And so they knew what this was all about, and that's why they came up with the Constitution. They came up with all these things to protect future generations from all this madness. And so the quote is, if a law is unjust, a man is not only right to disobey it, he is obligated to do so, by Thomas Jefferson. What do you think about that?
Well, this kind of reminds me how I think we've talked about this in a previous podcast where we showed a video of an Australia quarantine camp and an officer that was pretty much saying, "This is just my job. I'm enforcing this. I'm just doing
my
it.
job.
Yeah, I'm just doing my job." So that was his way of justifying what he was doing, even though maybe he thought it was wrong. Maybe he didn't think it was wrong. I don't know. But I think that's important because even like even if it is your job to enforce something, if what you're enforcing is wrong, you have a moral obligation to stand up for that. I get it, like I can kind of sympathize with it, but at the same time, like I think that's so important, and that goes for there's a lot of that going on where it's, yes, I know this is wrong, but, or yes, I think this is wrong, but it's my job, or but they're telling us to, but it's for our safety. And everything, you can't justify, if something's wrong, something's wrong. You can't try and justify it with whatever you try to justify it with. So I think that, I like that quote.
Yeah, and it doesn't just say, like, a person should do it, or an American citizen should do it. It says he is obligated to do so. That's the obligation of the citizen. And there's another quote that I don't have written down, but it was also from one of the founding fathers, is that it is the duty of the citizen to remove, like physically remove, the corrupt and unjust government if it goes to that level. And so what we got going on in Canada now is, we got force being used against citizens who are protesting, and they're out trying to gain their rights back. And at this point, it would justify for the citizenry to take charge and say, "Hey, this is enough. We elected you. You're fucking crazy, and we're removing you." And that's what that's what a good citizen would do.
Just going back to the fact that unfortunately, we elected this government. We were talking a little bit about political participation, and that's what makes a good citizen as well.
Yeah.
I'd have to look it up. I'm curious, but I don't think a lot of people voted in this election.
Check the stats, yeah. Because of course, what's being a good citizen in general, what it is. One thing is standing up for your principles and defending your rights that are given to you at birth. That's one. Two is defending, your constitutional rights that were also written and given to you by the founding fathers of America or Canada. And it is also participation and voting. You got to participate in this voting process, because that is how you elect people who rule you.
I know people
that make decisions about your life. These are big decisions. It's not like, back in the day, it's like, oh, you elect a guy and pretty much nothing happens within 4 years. But these are important times, and we had an election during the pandemic. And if you don't like how things are going, you don't like lockdowns, you don't like this, you don't like that, get this person out of office and vote for somebody who is against these things, right? Yeah. That's the duty of Canadian citizens. 100%. That's what it means of being a good citizen.
This is the Elections Canada website. It says that around 17 million Canadians cast a ballot.
So that's not even half the population.
17 million of what? How many do we have? 30?
What we got, like 36, 37, 38 maybe?
Something like that. Regardless.
Yeah.
That's
take
crazy.
away babies, take away under 18.
Yeah.
So about half, right? Probably something like that.
This translates into a voter turnout rate of about 63%.
And what was it previous years? This is the recent one, right?
Yeah, this is 2021.
2021. Yeah. Okay.
September 29th.
Okay. So let's discuss why is it that so few people vote?
I think they don't think their vote is significant. Like, it doesn't actually do anything.
Oh, they think they're not going to impact anything.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that could be a big reason for that.
I think that, like, I know people who this was their first year voting this year.
Yeah.
And, like, I never voted in my entire life. I'm like, I wish I could have voted this year. I was unfortunately not able to.
Yeah.
But it's unfortunate, because if everyone voted, we could have potentially seen a different turnout.
We could have seen a different outcome, yeah.
Yeah, it's such an easy thing to do, too, to go and vote.
You just go. It's just a day. Yeah. So one aspect of it is that a lot of people think their vote doesn't count, or it's not going to impact or whatever. But that's how half the population doesn't vote, and then the ones who are super vocal about something are the ones who get the biggest microphones, and it's perpetuated in the mainstream media that is influencing these votes, and then this is what we get. And so there's nothing to complain about our government, because we elected them.
Yeah, we did. It's kind of embarrassing to say that.
It is, yeah. Yeah, but we elected this, and this is what we've got. So a couple more quotes from the founding fathers. And again, Thomas Jefferson, amazing guy. All tyranny needs to gain a foothold is for people of good conscience to remain silent.
Yep, there's a lot of people who just are scared to speak up.
Yeah.
And that's why we still are where we are.
So, so now that looking at the statistics,
Mm-hmm.
the voter turnout that you mentioned
Yeah.
was like just about around 50% probably. That is the lowest voter turnout in
Yeah.
Canadian history.
I know. I've
Just going
seen
back to that. Like
and
that's fucking incredible.
and
And
there must
during
be
the
like
most
a
important
I was just
times.
gonna say, like, that's ironic, right? Considering that this election, I think, was so important.
But so many people were complaining about lockdowns and
Mm-hmm.
oh, I hate the lockdown. So many people lost their
Where were you when
businesses.
it was time to vote?
Where were you when it was actually going to count?
Yeah.
Where were you when, because this is the time to speak about your opinions, and obviously if you elect the same people, they're going to do the same
Mm-hmm.
things,
And
continuous lockdowns, continuous force of
yeah.
things.
And if I don't know, if you don't want to get involved in politics, which I know a lot of people don't, this is like the smallest contribution you can make is voting, right?
Hmm. Yeah, it's just like what, half an hour of your time
Mm-hmm.
of the day, and you just go in and it was like 5 minutes at my riding. There really weren't many people lined up. Like I voted in the last election too, and there were usually like lines to get in,
Mm-hmm.
but this time it was just, oh yeah, you want to vote? Come on in.
Well, there wasn't enough people to go and
Yeah,
create the line.
exactly. And that's what's surprising is because, like, if you really care about this stuff, if you really care about your country, you care about your own well-being,
Mm-hmm.
it is essential to go and vote and participate as a duty of as a Canadian. And I think this stuff is taught in schools. Like, I think
It
we've
is
got, the
like
social studies or
civics. Yeah.
civics. Yeah, civics is the class, and they say, hey,
The
this is
roles
your
and
duty.
responsibilities of a Canadian.
Yeah.
One of them is, I think, to vote. If
Well,
I'm,
yeah, it is. It
yeah.
is absolutely 100%. And um, I really like the extent that the American Constitution goes into, because it goes into saying that every American is obligated to own and bear arms from 18 to 60-year-old. If they're able to carry arms, they are obligated to go undergo the training and be able to be called up at a minute's notice.
Mm-hmm.
And if something goes wrong in the country, either it's internally or it's externally, that all these people could be called up as a militia to defend their country from either external
Mm-hmm.
pressures or from the internal government. And I think that's a healthy way to go, because a lot of the founding fathers mentioned that a citizen who is capable and who bears arms is a free citizen, and they could be free from the tyranny of the government. And typically, the way that these founding fathers saw tyranny arise in other civilizations was that it had to fulfill several things.
Mm-hmm.
And so another founding father, name of James Madison, says oppressors can tyrannize only when they achieve a standing army, an enslaved press, and a disarmed populace. And so this is why you get these politicians going into telling you, oh, we're going to disarm the populace for your own safety.
Mm-hmm.
But you're really taking protection away from law-abiding citizens.
Yeah.
Because it's not like they're going to take away the guns from the criminals. They don't follow the laws anyways.
Yep. No, you're right.
So it doesn't matter how many fucking laws you make, because they don't follow them.
I know. There's actually, I have a quote here. It says it's from, I believe it's I think he's either a philosopher or he's a psychologist or something. I'm not too sure, but this is the quote here. Authoritarianism in religion and science, let alone politics, is becoming increasingly accepted, not particularly because so many people explicitly believe in it, but because they feel themselves individually powerless.
That's
That's
very true.
exactly like even just going into like if we don't have any way of protecting ourselves, we're powerless. If we are constantly being surrounded in this propaganda of fear and we're always fearful and scared, we're powerless,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we choose not to vote or not to participate in politics or whatever, we're just perpetuating that feeling of being powerless and not having Like, I just,
Well, what's your experience like with your peers? How do they feel about the elections? How do they, I mean, what do they think? Tell me about your
um,
experience.
honestly, most of my friends don't give a fuck, pretty much. Uh,
Do you find that they're complacent
mm,
in paying attention to
so it's,
politics?
no, they don't pay attention. They only know because I tell
There
them.
you go.
So anything that they, I
So
don't know,
you
that
are a
they
good
learn
citizen.
about what's going on, usually because I never stop talking and I just, whatever, and I'm sure they don't want to hear it from me. So I'm sorry to my friends who have to listen to me all the time. But no, they don't care about politics. They don't pay attention. I'm sure they didn't vote, or maybe they did. I don't know. Um, but I do see on social media that now that's different. Like in my own personal life, and pretty much no one really cares. On social media, though, it's like this whole movement of everyone trying to change the world and your vote matters and all this stuff. But it's also, I always hear that from the same people who want all these measures in place, who want these mandates, who want this more government, who want this government control, who are on that side. So it's like, I don't know. There's too many people that just don't care, and then there's a lot of people that do care, but they're on a different side, I guess.
Well, yeah, I mean that's what the media does. Like as Madison says, that they need to achieve three things: a standing army, an enslaved press, and a disarmed populace. And I mean, I heard these commercials about, disarming or taking away more guns to make Canadians feel more safe. They always use it under that pretense.
Yeah, to
But
make us
another
feel more safe.
factor is enslaved press because they only show the faces of the people who they want to elect and who have provided them the most donations in their campaign. And those are the people who get the biggest microphones and the biggest stage, and everybody sees them. And the people who are not going to be voting for, anti-lockdown or anti-forcing mandates and all of these things, they are not going to know about them because they're not shown on television because they don't have enough money for it. And quite frankly, in our society, it is like the people who talk the biggest bullshit about all sorts of issues
Mm-hmm.
are the ones who get the biggest microphones.
Mm-hmm.
They get promoted on social media, they
Mm-hmm.
get promoted on mainstream media, and then everybody else thinks, oh, it must be true because everyone's talking about it. Oh, I
Or
must vote this way.
or they don't agree with it, but they don't care enough to say anything about it.
Yeah, and then there's exactly, and then there's another population, which is pretty much half of our population who didn't fucking vote, is that they're gonna be like, oh, I don't really agree with this, but what can I do?
Yeah, I can't do anything. What does my one vote matter? Well, when everyone says, what is my one vote, then that's when you get 50% of people who don't vote, right?
That's right.
That mentality, like, that mentality does not work in a democratic society because then you don't get, the whole point of this is to have a say in who's elected, right?
Yeah.
And if most people aren't participating in that, then we get people we don't want in office. Unless everyone who didn't vote, I mean, was no, I'm never mind. Never mind.
You're not gonna say it,
No,
right? Okay. Well, another
we're
question.
just making assumptions here.
Yeah, well, everything we say, you gotta take it with a grain of salt
Yeah,
because we're
don't
not
believe
showing
us.
actual proof,
Think for
except for that.
yourself.
Think for yourself and make your own decisions.
Mm-hmm.
But we do say important stuff in here, so you should listen to us too. um, okay, another question to discuss is what is the level of complacency among the student population?
High, very high.
Like, what's your experience? You're a first year U of T student. What do you think
Well,
in the
for the
classroom?
very, very few times, oh, in the classroom that I've never been to because I'm not allowed.
That's right.
Yeah. Um, in my very limited experience of being on campus, every single person is wearing a mask outside.
Nice.
Every single person, like every single person is wearing a mask outside, at least at my school. Maybe other schools are different. And I have no reason to be on campus, but for the few times that I was, that was my experience. Like you're outside, but whatever. I'm not getting into that. There's that. Being in class, I had most of my professors talk about how we should all be getting vaccinated,
Mm-hmm.
and then my class sizes are like 1,000 students. I'm sure all those students are listening to this and going, okay, sure, professor, I'm gonna listen to you because you have a fancy degree and a fancy title. But I'm gonna be honest, I did not have an experience, a university experience. I did not meet pretty much anybody, so I don't really have much to say on that because I wasn't around the school that much. I wasn't around my peers, so I don't really know. But for the limited interactions I have had with people at my school, with some of my roommates, level of complacency is pretty high.
Mm-hmm. So they're not really concerned about what's happening in the world. They're not concerned about what's happening in their own country. They're not concerned about the university politics. Like, for example,
no, they are, but they have a lot to say, but I don't know, like, it's weird. Some people just don't care at all, but then there's some that do care and they claim to care so much about social justice and this and that, but they only care about the things that they're told to care about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean they're being told and perpetuated by the media and by the their peers who are continuously sharing those things on social media, telling oh, you got to support this, you got to support that. It's a noble cause and you're a good citizen if you do that.
Yeah, coming back to this good citizen thing, everyone has this like false idea of what it means to be a good citizen, so they do everything they can to fit into that category when it's like, I don't think that's what being a good citizen is.
Yeah, and it makes sense because the quality of your life it is in direct proportion to the quality of the people you consistently spend your time with. And so if
Thank God I found
they well, see, there you go, because now the quality of your life is different than from the quality of your life before because you're spending your time with different people. And when you're spending your time with, people who are consistently negative or they're consistently perpetuating the same things and they're talking about, oh yeah, let's lock down more. Let's, triple mask and let's do that.
They don't want to be locked down. They want us to be locked down.
Yeah. And then you start believing in those things because you're trying to just fit in. And that's the unfortunate reality, is that our student population is complacent because everybody is complacent. They think, oh, from my experience, when I speak to people, it's always like, look, I am the biggest victim because this and this and this. Or you just go and you say, oh, how you doing? And then they just go, you can't believe what happened. And then you just start ranting about how terrible their life is. And it's like, it's so negative and it's so depressing that they find it amusing that, the worse my life is, the better. Because then they get to tell all these stories and they get people feeling bad for them. But that's a victim mentality, and that's very detrimental to you and the people around, because everybody's now going to think, oh my God, it's it's so terrible that this happened to you. And that means you have no responsibility. That means you're not taking responsibility for your life and you're not taking responsibility for your country. And quite frankly, students should be responsible for the country the most, because we are new voters, right? So we can finally go and vote, and we're excited to do that. But what's more important is that we are the ones who are going to be living in this country for years to come, for decades to come. And so it's in our best interest to know what's going to happen later on.
Yeah, I think
But
so.
we don't give a fuck. We don't care because, oh, this happened. Oh, you see, this is so terrible. That victim mentality exists in our student population, and it needs to go, because if it doesn't go, then the students are actively giving their they're actively giving their power to the institutions and the government to control them. And that's why it's so easy now.
Because I think what's been popular nowadays too is, like you said, I'm trying to figure out how to word this, but complaining and having this victim mentality and then practically begging the institution or the government to change it. And this goes beyond mandates, and this goes for a lot of other issues that we have in society that everyone thinks is going to just be changed by, like, that these governments or these institutions are going to change it. There's all these systematic issues with these governments or corporations or whatever it may be, and that they're going to be the ones to change it. No, we have to be the ones to change it. We have to take responsibility for that. And I mean, that's another thing, is personal responsibility. We lack a lot of that nowadays. And that's also what makes a good citizen. And like, we need to start taking control of our life, taking control of our country, because we can't just leave it up to, we can't just like go and complain and then hope and beg these governments or institutions to just change it.
And when something happens, it's like, oh, I'm sorry that happened to you. That's that's so bad. That's so bad. You know, like that's the shit mentality.
We have to stop feeling sorry for ourselves and for other people.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't get anyone anywhere. It makes no progress. And that's for everything. That goes for everything.
Well, it's life. Bad things happen all the time, but the question is, what are you going to do about it? You know, are you going to just sit and cry for the rest of your life?
Exactly. Like, governments are going to try and pull and do bad things, right? They're going to do that. That's inevitable. We see it here. We see it all around the world. We've seen it in history. That kind of thing happens. Instead of crying and complaining about it, we have to take responsibility and do our best to try and change it. But we can't just complain that this is how we can't complain that this is how these governments are. Instead, we can just try to fix them. We can't, I don't know, that there's such a mentality out there that we should just cry about, why are these governments this way, and why are they doing this, and why are they doing that? It's so wrong. It's, what about equality and this and that? Okay, but now let's go and do something about it. You can't just leave it up to them to fix, because they're never going to do that.
This only fixes itself with action. And another thing I wanted to bring up, because it's not only that, being a good citizen is this and that. We already described what being a good citizen means and what it should mean, whereas what the government is telling you it should mean. So it isn't about complying. The more you comply, the better citizen you are. That's total nonsense. That's bullshit. And that's government propaganda, so they can take more of your rights away. So they're tricking you into believing this. But another thing I wanted to bring up is the level of complacency of the student population is not only within the students of the general, in the university, but it's also within our community, our CSUN community. It is in other anti-lockdown, anti-mandate groups that are leading the charge of freedom. There's a big level of complacency there. And the reality is that the work is done by like 2-3% of the people in those groups. And why is that? Because the mentality hasn't changed, and the narrative hasn't changed. It hasn't been shifting.
No, people on our side are guilty of the victim.
They're guilty of the same
100%.
stuff.
100%.
Yeah. And what happens is they, always stand for this, and then they join a group, and then they don't do much except for criticize for the things that our group is doing. So, I mean, great. You have other ideas. Take that up. Go and explore that and see if that leads to something good, or bring that up and start taking action. Show up to your events. Start a new club. Start a new thing that CSUN would do. Like the way the podcast began is you throw out an idea into the chat and you start bringing that up.
You were lucky enough to have me respond.
I was, yeah. And we got a good thing going, and we're taking action, and we're distributing this information to the rest of the world. But that's the story here, is that our student population is complacent. Our movement is complacent. They're not actually taking action. They love it that, we're doing stuff, but Nothing's going to change until you start doing shit.
But another thing, though, this podcast is not going to change the world. CSON's not going to change the world. But we can still do our little part, and we can't let that fact discourage us from doing anything at all. Like, even if you make a little contribution, you're not going to go and like I said, you're not going to change the world. It's not all going to go back to normal, but you can't let that steer you away from even trying in the first place, right?
Yeah.
The same thing with voting. Yes, your one particular vote maybe won't make the biggest difference in the world, but that you can't let that discourage you from going and doing that anyways, because then if everyone has that mentality, then that's when nothing happens. Same thing with this. If we all have that same mentality, then nothing ever happens. Us individually will not change the world at all. But if we all let that discourage us, then nothing's ever going to get solved. So we might as well try, right?
That's right. And like I mentioned, any big dream, any big accomplishment, I've mentioned this before and I'm going to mention it again. I'm going to sound like a broken record, but it's necessary. The things that I mentioned over and over are very important. And because this is not going to be defeated overnight like this. And every overnight success is done over many days. And so many people think, oh, Elon Musk became successful overnight like this, or Bill Gates did this and he just became successful. That never happened. They became successful because they worked their ass off over and over every single day, grinding and doing things, slowly moving towards their target. But obviously, like, everybody was a novice one day, right? Elon Musk was a novice one day. Einstein didn't know what 1 + 1 was at some point. He had to learn it just like everybody else. And the reason they got to those points is because they actually worked and took action every single day and they were consistent at it. And so if you believe like taking that one little action is not going to contribute to society, not going to change anything, well, it won't, but a combination of those small actions will. And that's the importance here, is that you don't have to focus on the final outcome. Just focus on your small little task that you got going and know that all of those things contribute. For example, we've got over 1 million votes with the PPC, meaning that at least over 1 million people in Canada disagree with lockdowns. They disagree with the mandates. But I want to see those 1 million people take their masks off. I want to see those 1 million people having millions of conversations all around Canada, telling people what's going on and being public about it. Now the narrative is going to change because so many people start thinking, they start sitting out at the dinner table and questioning these things. But if you're sitting silent there and you're not actually taking action, then nothing's ever going to change. And then you're going to bitch and complain for the rest of your life because nothing's changing.
Yeah, because there's the same mentality that there's for voting and for being involved in politics, the same idea that, oh, I'm not going to do it, like, my contribution isn't going to change anything, so what's the point? Well, if everyone has that mentality, then nothing changes. And I think that's why we are where we are. That's why any government or any country, that's why these things happen, because everyone is like, oh, well, I'm not going to make a difference, so what's the point? Well, there is a point, because if everyone cares and actually does their part, then you have more control over what happens than if less people do. So.
Yep, we need to grow good citizens out of the students that are coming out of the institutions right now. And the first thing we're focusing on is our own community. And so that's our main focus here, is to get people active, get people moving, get people excited about these things, because it's very important to our lives. It's essential to be public about the things you believe in, because maybe others believe it too. And you'll be surprised at how many people agree with you when you actually start speaking out, you stop wearing a mask, and you start having these healthy conversations with people. And so one last thing I wanted to bring up is another quote, and we're going to leave it at that, is that there's no greater tyranny than that which is perpetuated under the shield of law and in the name of justice.
Well, I have nothing to say.
And that's by Montesque. It's another no, that's not a founding father. That's I think it was a judge, one of the judges who was part of the American Civil Revolution and all those things. So some very good quotes, some great conversations today, and I hope this gets a lot of people moving. And if you finally decide that you're going to take action and you're going to get excited and you're going to start speaking out and doing things about your situation and actually changing the situation, reach out to cson.ca and we'll get in touch with you soon. But thank you for now, and we'll be back very soon.